This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Freest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast, Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur. This is episode 105, and it's Creating Your Story for an Encore Career, a conversation with Geoff Kullman. My goal is to help you create a compelling future for yourself in an encore career, or as I like to say, become a silver entrepreneur. But I will also share ideas on how companies can connect with talent that you will provide for them and create value for both of you. I always encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode and use that as a tool to capture notes as you explore the concepts in this episode. And if you're considering or starting an encore career, please take the self-assessment quiz to help you create some quick clarity around your possible choices. Today, we're going to be talking with Geoff Kullman. Geoff is a direct response copywriter and brand strategist. He helps personal brand businesses build deep connections with their audience and launch significant digital businesses. He utilizes the latest in neuroscience, psychology, and influence to write powerful emails, sales pages, and launch campaigns that help you convert like crazy. He also helps personal brand businesses find their voice, discover their story, and declare their message to the world. So some of the questions we're going to be talking with Geoff about today are, how can he help someone start their personal brand? What are the elements of the story that they need to tell as a personal brand? What are the pieces of material they need to create first? And finally, how has he worked with people who are beginning encore careers? And I'll say Geoff has provided me with some invaluable insights in just the short time we've been able to work together. Welcome, Geoff. I appreciate you being on the show today. And I guess to lead off, we'd like to have you introduce yourself, explain your journey to what you're doing now and some of the work you help others with.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Lynn. Yeah, so I am Geoff Kullman. I'm a direct response copywriter, which means a lot to folks that do what I do, but means nothing to anyone else. So what I really do is write the marketing material or help people write their own marketing material for their emails, for their websites, for blog posts, stuff like that, that actually gets people to take action, to lead them in the direction that you want them to go. That's the direct response part. Some people call it a conversion copywriter. So we want to essentially help people make the decision that you want them to make. And that's especially important as you're launching out into this new career or second career. You know what you're talking about. Your expertise used to rely on the name of your company or the name of your title to convince people of the authority to go with you. Now you need to do it a bit different, perhaps, and actually convince people through a story, through writing, through emails, through podcasts, things like that, that they should still go with you. So that's a lot of what I do or help people do. Either I write it for them or I coach them through it.
Maybe you could give us, as you worked with people who are doing a personal brand, and maybe I'm an expert in logistics or whatever it may be, what are some of the actual pieces of copy you can help them write to tell their story?
Yeah, the first thing, everyone needs a website if you're making a pivot. Everyone needs an email list, all that stuff. But I think the most important piece before you even get there is starting to figure out the story that you need to tell. Perhaps your life story, your founder's story, your origin story, call it whatever you will. But figuring out a way to tell that so that people's eyes don't glaze over and they desperately want to walk out of the room. How can you tell that story in a way that's actually going to interest people and invite them into your story so that they want to lean in and ask questions? So that's not something that most of us are used to doing. I always say I've got 4 kids. They range from 2 to 10. And one of the things I've had to learn to do is tell a good story. So if I don't tell a good story in a way that interests my kids, they're just going to complain or walk out of the room or not go to sleep or whatever. And they're not going to do that thing that I hope that they're going to do, which might be just laugh or get entertained as well. But we need to think of our audiences. So those people in our sphere of influence, those people that we want to convince, we need to think of them just the same way that I think of my kids. I need to tell a story that interests and engages and invites them in. And we do that through a very specific type of way that's maybe a bit difficult at first, but I think if you have someone else helping you through it, doesn't have to be me, doesn't have to be a paid person, could be your spouse, could be one of your kids, helping you figure out, oh, that part's really interesting, you should lead with that. But we'll start geeking out on story structure later on. But that's something that everyone needs at the start. You can have a website. We can talk about website structures and what you need to say on your website or what you need to say in your emails. But what you need first is your story, your why, to get people interested in what you do and why they should bother contacting you or listening to you or hiring you.
Yeah. Well, I think of when I started, one of the first things that people recommended is I needed an elevator speech. And it wasn't so much for them as it was for me. And I had to learn, the first thing I had to learn about my elevator speech is not for me. It's about how I help someone else. And I'm sure you have that same sequence you go through with people.
Absolutely. I've heard Donald Miller, who came up with the story brand framework. He talks a lot about you need to start with the problem. So you start with common ground of too many people or everyone has a lawn that they're not proud of. So you start with a common problem. Then you can introduce your solution of we have this problem, an undesirable, unpleasing lawn. We provide landscaping services. We cut people's lawns. We help people's lawns look beautiful. But you started with that problem, with that common ground, and which gets them interested, builds that connection. Yeah, you need to start there. So an elevator pitch is certainly a very short form of your story. It should be 30 seconds long. It's meant for an elevator ride. So what I teach people is you need to actually start with something that grabs attention. This is all based on neuroscience, brain science, stuff that I get to geek out on, and I geek out on it way too much. But you need to start with grabbing their attention. So that's in story, we call that like an inciting incident or an explosion event, something that actually really grabs people's attention and makes them look over to you and go, oh, that's interesting. I want to know more about that. So that's the part of your story. It often comes not at the beginning. It often in your story is in the middle or near the end. So that's something where your spouse or one of your kids or whomever can actually listen to your story and tell you, oh, that bit at the end, that part should be at the very beginning. So then you can get people's attention. So for instance, in my story, I just say, I didn't speak until I was 5 years old. Gets people's attention, gets them wondering, well, why the heck not? What was wrong? What was wrong with you? Why didn't you speak till you were 5 years old? Then I can tell them the story of I grew up in a family where my brother spoke more than enough for the both of us, where everyone spoke for me, all that stuff, where I didn't really have a voice. And then it turns into, well, I've always fought for the underdog. I've always helped people find their voice. That's why I do what I do now, so on and so forth. But you start with that event that gets people to lean in, grabs attention. Then you can start to build connection. So you start with attention, then you can build connection. And again, brain science wise, that releases a whole bunch of this neurochemical called oxytocin, builds connection, builds empathy between you and the person listening to the story. So you can imagine with your audience of ideal prospects, so to speak, you're building that connection with them. You've gained their attention. You've made them look your way and lean into what you're saying first. And now you're actually getting to build that connection with them because they're interested in what you're saying. So then you can get into, oh, I didn't have a voice. I had a brother that spoke too much. Like I said, I always hid behind my mom's leg, all that stuff. But now I'm building a connection. And with my audience, that's a lot of, oh, that was me too. Or, oh, I had a sibling like that. Or, oh, one of my kids does that. So building that connection, that relatable connection. And whether you're coming out of corporate and making this second career or whatever story we tell, there are always those connection points where people relate to what we're saying. And again, oftentimes it might take us some fumbling around, some second opinions, second set of eyes or ears to point those out to us. But we all have them. We all have those connection points where people are interested in what we're saying because they can relate, because they can connect. And then the third part of a story structure that I teach, we start with attention, we build connection. Then we give people a little bit of a treat. Might be a joke, might be an anecdote, just a little bit of fun. That releases some dopamine. We want to drive that pleasure, essentially. We want to get attention, build connection, then drive pleasure through giving them a bit of a treat. Like I said, that's joke or anecdote, or just going beyond that initial connection of we're not just connected, but now I'm making you feel good about it too.
Great. Well, as you spoke, it reminded me of, especially thinking of people who are experts. It could be that you don't want to lead off with all your successes, but you might want to start with when something went dramatically wrong in some fashion, so people can relate to the, oh yeah, I've had that go wrong too, kind of a thing.
Yeah. I had this one client, 9-figure client, huge company. I had this one client, they flew me out. I was a little disappointed. It was 9-figure client, but they didn't fly me first class. So I was a little disappointed in that. But anyway, they flew me out, or even business class. I was back in the back of the plane. Anyway, the first thing you see when you walk into their beautiful new building is all their rewards, all how great they are. And one of the first things I said was, I walked in and I was impressed, but I didn't feel like I could relate or connect. Like maybe I want to do business with you, but I'm afraid to now because can I measure up? Do I qualify for your level of success? When we can start with that going way back to what we said, when we could start with that problem or that commonality, that common humanity even, it helps us relate so much better to the people that we're trying to talk to. So if you have a massive resume full of great accomplishments, fantastic. Don't start your story there. Don't start telling everyone how great you are, how many accomplishments or awards you have, because I can't relate to that. You can get to your awards later on, but if you actually start with a struggle, a common pain point, that connection point, you build connections so much stronger and so much longer through being real, right? We can be competent and we should speak to our competence, especially as second career people, perhaps. We have a lot of accomplishments. We have a lot of awards or things that show that we know what we're talking about. We have degrees, we have awards, we have these decades of experience. But when you start building this personal brand, when you start reaching out as you rather than as your company name, people care a little bit about your competence, but first they need to know about your character. They need to know that they connect with you, that you're someone they can trust. Even if you're trying to get hired as a consultant, they need to be able to prove to their boss that you're a good person that they should bring in, not just your competence, but your character as well. And we do that through building that human connection. Like you said, don't start trying to impress everyone. Just start by building that connection.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. And even though, quote, I'm maybe an expert in this or that or the other thing, sometimes I think of there's others who are better than I am. I think as we start in our second career, we have to own our expertise, acknowledging, but like you said, it's not just about that. We do have to come out and be confident in what we do know, but we do have to also, quite frankly, also have to have the mindset of an apprentice, because there's all this marketing and stuff we're going to have to learn that people like you can help us with. It's an interesting thing as you're, especially in a second career, you have to own your expertise, but you also have to have the mind of an apprentice.
Yeah. Isn't that the exciting part, right? You get to not just launch or this new second career, this pivot that you're making, but you get to learn all these new things. You get to rely on your expertise that you've built over time, that competence that you built over time. But then you also get to learn and dive into all these new skills. Now, there's a lot to learn, and those can go in stages and in steps, but that excites me. Like, I'm not the best copywriter in the world. There are guys that make millions of dollars a year doing what I do, tens of millions of dollars doing what I do. But my goal, my purpose is just to build those connections, to speak from my character, my competence. I'm a very good writer, I think. If I toot my own horn, and Canadians, we don't like to do that too much. But if I toot my own horn, I'm good at what I do, but I'm more interested in building connection and working with those people that I connect with, that I really want to connect with. So I find that leaning into the character piece to be so much more exciting. Then learning all the new skills, that's exciting for me too. But relying less on just your competence, relying more on your character and your story, it's so exciting for me.
Yeah, both for myself and as I talk with others, their technical skills and stuff are certainly valuable. And they, again, as I mentioned, they have to lean into those. But on the other hand, the other value they bring to people is they've been through a lot. Okay, so they've seen when it didn't work. They've also worked with people a lot. So people can have technical skills, but often the folks that I'm helping, they have a lot of experience working with people. And when things go bad or good, it's not just about the technical part. It's, again, as you said, what's your character? How do you relate to people? I think that is an interesting piece that, again, folks launching an Encore career have to remind themselves of, is that their experience working with people can be very valuable to other companies.
For sure, yeah. And think back to the past year and a half that we've been through, right? At the start of the pandemic, at the start of the economic collapse associated with that, I'm someone that I'm not quite old enough to have really been in a solid career position the last time there was a recession. I was around, but I was starting my career back in 08, 09. But if you were being a coach, if you were coaching people through the economic response to the pandemic this time, if you didn't have experience from last time, you were much less credible, right? You didn't have that credibility that others folks did who helped businesses through the 08, 09 crash. You have even more experience. You help them through the .com bubble burst or the 80s or whatever. My parents speak lots to the mortgage rates being like 20% interest. Now, I can't even fathom that, right? But if you've been through those, if you have the confidence and the experience to walk people through those, now I trust you more. But don't speak to just your competence. Tell me a story about your character, how you helped guide people through that. That's so much stronger at building a connection. And again, there's a specific story structure that I walk people through, but all you got to do really is ask your wife, ask your husband, ask your kids, where do your eyes glaze over when I tell this story? How should I tell it better? And they've been waiting probably for a decade or more for you to ask them that or give them permission to tell you that, oh, your stories suck. Your stories are boring. But your stories don't suck or boring They just need a bit of a rearrangement, and they can help you do that. Perhaps they've been eager for you to do that. At least that's my experience with my parents. I can't wait for them to ask me to help them with their stories. But yeah, and then once you can nail down that story in a way that connects, speaks to the competence and the character, you're golden. You're halfway there.
And would you say, again, people that are just starting out may think, I have to have a new story for every occasion, but I think you probably can just work with a key story. Not that you want that to be your only thing you ever say, but still, you can stick with that as the opening for people.
Absolutely. And the way I tell it, again, relating back to my kids, when I tell a story, I know the parts of that story or my story or whatever story we're telling. I know the parts that interest my kids. So I leave out the other details and I include the details that are relevant or interesting to them. We do the same with our own stories. Whatever business context we're in, we know the full story, but we can leave out details that don't interest that audience and remember to include the parts that do interest that audience. So I have a whole long story about how I didn't speak till I was 5. And then this is why I chose that career. And I work with these underdogs. And I was big into advocacy for people in Africa. I have a lot of details that I could get into, but I pick and choose based on the audience that I'm talking to, of which parts are interesting to them and which parts aren't. So you don't need a million different stories. You might need some different parts of the same story. And then you just learn these parts are interesting for this audience. These parts are not interesting for that audience. I'll include them or I'll leave them out. So all you're really doing is creating one story and then just knowing which parts to pick and choose for which audience.
In your experience helping people, what are some of the missteps you've seen? What are things where people like myself didn't get it right?
First of all, permission to not get it right, at least not right at the start. It's like anything. It's a skill that you learn and develop over time. So if you don't start right, that's totally fine. It's not anything to beat yourself up about or lose confidence over. But usually, and the reason that I talk through get attention, build connection, then do the treat, the dopamine hit at the end, the mistake people usually make is they start with a joke. They think they're building a connection by starting with a joke. And then you might get a laugh, but what actual geeking out neuroscience studies show is that that connection doesn't actually last. They've done research on actual Super Bowl ads, companies that are spending bazillions of dollars to produce an ad and then buy an ad spot in the Super Bowl. And if they just made a funny ad, those are the ones that we like the best, but those aren't actually the products we buy the most. So they weren't the most successful because they didn't build that long-term connection. The ones that start with that attention grabber and then build connection and then reward us with that dopamine hit, those are the ones, specifically about Super Bowl ads, those are the ones that we buy the most, that build the best connection and the longest term connection. So we want to do the same thing in our story. So the mistake to avoid is don't start with a joke, start with the attention grabber, start with that explosion event. And then from there, you probably know, okay, this is how I build connection with my audience. That's the second piece. So that's, again, ACT, grab attention, build connection, give them a treat. That's the order to go in. And that's why. Because so many people make that same mistake of not starting there.
You bring a good point up too, that I just remembered the making mistakes. Again, coming out of the corporate world, and I was in manufacturing, 99.9% of the time, we didn't want to make any mistakes. And we wanted high quality and stuff. So sometimes I think it's tough for those of us, especially who have been in the business world for a long time, to say, I'm going to go out and I'm bad at this to begin with, but your work can help us get better faster, even if we're not really good at it.
And that's part of the fun too, right? You're in this space of Encore career. Maybe you've made a pivot. Maybe the Encore part was forced upon you and you were laid off in the last recession, or you made the choice yourself, got bored with retirement, so you're starting this new thing up. Whatever the case, you get to have fun with this thing. And I don't mean that flippantly, like you're not just there to have fun, you're there to make money and impact lives. But you get to explore these things a little bit and test out what works and what doesn't. And yeah, everyone makes mistakes. And that's an important part of the process, is that you can make mistakes. You don't want to make them with your clients, perhaps. Figure that part out, figure how you're going to deliver your service or your product really well. But you can make mistakes in how you tell your story. That's not the end of the world. You can make mistakes in accidentally sending out the wrong email or putting the wrong words on your website. Those things are all fixable and redoable, editable, if you will. So this has taken me a long time to figure this out too. That's okay. We can fix these things and you have permission to just lean into that. I edit my website way too much because when I'm out for a walk, I have this great thought. I'll try to write it down on my phone while I'm walking. I go home and my wife doesn't see me first because I go right to the computer and I fix that thing on my website, put this new thought on there or this new email campaign or whatever. All these things are fixable. All these things are editable. And that's part of the fun that we get to have with this thing, especially the marketing side of things and how we get our name out there and our message out there. We get to play around with it a little bit. None of it is set in stone. It's all putty that we get to play with. And that might not be someone's background. You might come from a background where you had to dot every I and cross every T and make sure that everything was just so right from the beginning. We don't have to do that anymore. And that's part of discovering your message and even your audience and the words that they want to hear is we get to play around with it.
I'm a perfect example. I spent the first several years being a consultant, helping manufacturing leaders get better at what they do. And then I decided to make the pivot to actually helping people who wanted to start Encore Careers. And all I had to do, I had to ask my boss, myself, and my wife, my other boss.
Yeah.
But
don't forget that one.
Don't forget that. But basically, I could do that. Now, I know you've helped me a little bit here. We've actually been revising the website and we've actually revised it every day. So it's one of those things that once I put it up there, I can go back literally every day and do something different. So there is an interesting amount of freedom there.
Absolutely. I was just going to use that exact same word. It's fun, but it's also freeing. There's so much freedom in it once you find the words, then you can stick with it. Google will really like it when you stick with the words that are on your website. That will increase your reputation score on Google. But don't be handcuffed by that, right? You have this freedom to explore and express yourself now in a way you might not have had before. It doesn't necessarily make you look less professional to your audience. As your audience grows, you want to stick with your message a little bit more. But even a common friend of ours, Mike Kim, right? He's explored the idea of pivot. He's explored the idea of you are the brand. He's explored the idea of copyproof. He's tested these ideas out with his audience, which is much larger audience than mine. I don't know about yours, but much larger than mine. And his audience allows him to do that, lets him do that because they're more interested not in the competence. They know he's competent. They're interested in his character and what is he exploring here? What's he trying out here? So again, if the guys who have bigger audiences than us have permission to do it, we certainly have permission to do it as well. Lean into that freedom, lean into that fun of the personal brand.
So as people are starting to work on their personal brand with you or with others, do you have a suggested, sequence or a way to approach? I know you want to start with the story, and then what are some of the other things you recommend for them that they do next?
So let's go back to the website. I think we said early on that we'd come back to that. So on your website, first of all, your website, we already talked about this. It doesn't need to be perfect, especially right off the bat, but you do still want to follow an order to building a personal brand website. The reason that I say start with story, figuring out your story first, is because we get to build this thing that's not just a brand, but it's a personal brand. So we get to start with our story. But then when we get to the website, break it up into 5 sections. So there's that hero section, the part that you see before you scroll down anywhere, the header, whatever you want to call it, but that hero section right off the bat. So that has your headline, your subhead, should have a call to action button, like a book a call or buy this thing kind of button. So start off with that header section. Next, you see on a lot of websites, especially personal brand websites, a banner of logos, authority logos. I've worked with these people. In my case, I've written for these brands. So you hit them with that headline that's all about the transformation that you help people go through. Then you hit them with the authority. I know what I'm talking about because these people have hired me. These companies have hired me. And if you're going into an Encore career, you probably have worked with some good brands just as your company or as an employee of your company. So you can perhaps put those there. You might need to get permission or whatever, but the legal problems we can leave aside, but you can put those authority logos there or a testimonial that speaks to your authority there. That's the second section. Is usually pretty thin in terms of how much space it takes up on the screen. Then you go into an agitate section. So you really lean into the problem that your customer or potential customer is dealing with. And pardon the imagery, but this is the section where I say you twist the knife. You don't just identify the problem they're going through. You really lean into it and say, it's not just that you want to lose 20 pounds. It's that if you don't lose it now, you're going to need to lose 30 pounds in a year or whatever. Really twist that knife and agitate the pain point that they have. Then you can introduce yourself as the guide. So that's like the 4th section on your website where you introduce yourself. And if you need an example, just go to my website where I give like a little teaser of my story in this section. And then I link to my about page where I tell the full story or fuller story. But people are interested more in the problem that you solve for them rather than your story. You need to work on your story. You need to have that ready to go. But also remember, people are there on your website to solve a problem. But we need to include that piece that's about you, that bio piece. And then you want to have an opt-in, a way to get them on your email list. So you offer them, we call it a lead magnet, like a free PDF 5 tips to do that or 7 resources for this. Whatever is digestible pretty quick for them, but also positions you as an expert in your field, your area of expertise. So those are the 5 sections you really just need on your homepage anyway. Your whole website, needs a bit more than that. But people freak out about their homepage needing to be this big, long, elaborate thing they need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on. No, you just need those 5 sections, like the authority logo section. That's not even any words. So really, it's 4 sections that you're writing. And it doesn't need to be something that's overwhelming. People get overwhelmed with that part of the website. You don't need to. And again, you can build on this as you go too. But you start with the header section, that hero section. Then you do the authority. Then you agitate a pain point, position yourself as the authority, a bit of a bio section, and you offer them an opt-in. That's really all you need on that homepage. You can have more on the about page, on the services page, whatever. But on your homepage, at least, which is probably the first one that you put up, that's all you need on there. And then get people to book a call. Whatever you feel like you're missing that doesn't fit into those sections. If you're a consultant or a coach or whatever that pivot is in your career, then you can tell the rest of that story on the call. Yeah, but keep your website simple, keep it easy. It doesn't need to be something that's exhausting or overwhelming for you.
Yeah, I think we were both on a webinar where they mentioned that initial decisions to move ahead or read more on the website happen in a second or so. So that hero section, you got to start there because that may be all they look at.
It's about, I think it was like 5 milliseconds. Again, I'll geek out on neuroscience for a second. Like the brain makes decisions incredibly quickly, or certainly forms opinions and impressions incredibly quickly. If anyone's ever read the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, which I think was about 15 years old now, but if you've ever read that, we know we make decisions real quick. That subconscious part of our brain, it's how we've adapted as a species to know things quickly. And then we can think rationally about it for longer. But yeah, the words we put, especially on that hero section, matter because we form opinions and make decisions pretty quickly as humans.
So what would be some following steps then? Just briefly, maybe you could share what are the next couple of pages you might want to, again, promote yourself as a personal brand.
Yeah, so we talked about your story. Your about page is a great place to put that story. You want to remember as you're writing it out that the story is about you, but it's actually about them. So it's your story, but include the bits that are interesting to your audience and delete the bits that are not, or save them for another time if they're not interesting to your audience. So your dog's name when you were 5 years old, I'm sure it was a cute dog, but it's probably not relevant to your business prospects. Unless it is hyper relevant, unless your second career is that you're training dogs. Okay. But leave out those parts that aren't interesting to your audience and include and really lean into those parts of your story that are interesting and appealing to your audience. And that's exactly what your about page is for. And then always remember to include an option, give them the option to whatever that next step is for you, book a call, download a free thing, pay for this product, whatever that second step is that you want them to take, always give them an option to do that. Otherwise, they're lost. They don't know where to go next, and they'll just click the back button and leave your website altogether. So make sure you got that about page where you're telling your story that interests them. Always have a call to action on every page of your website. On my site, on sites that I write for people, services page, this is what I offer. This is how I can help you. Again, it's not just what I offer, but it's the benefits that they'll receive from working with you. In the copywriting world, we talk a lot about features and benefits. You want to speak less to the features, like you'll get 30 hours of training and 8 hours of this module course or whatever. You want to speak more to the benefits. So what am I going to get out of those 30 hours? What am I going to get out of that online course? You can speak to the features. Don't feel that you have to ignore them, but always follow those features up with a benefit. And you can do that on your services page, or if you're building an online course or selling online coaching or whatever, include those benefits. And then always have a contact page as well, obviously. And that doesn't need to be more than a form if you want it more elaborate than that. People want to connect with you. They're on your site because they want to connect with you and find out more about you. So give them that option as well. If your business gets busy enough, which it will eventually, you can always take down the link to book a call with you. Maybe you get them to fill out a form instead. That's what I have right now. People can't book a call with me because I'm too busy, but they can fill out a form. And if it's a good match, perhaps, or I think it might be a good match, then I'll offer to book a call with them. So you can do the same because your business will grow eventually as you make this pivot into a second career. But yeah, at first, get people on a call would be what I recommend. So I have that contact page, I have that booking page, so people can reach out to you that way.
What do you recommend as far as often, again, people that work with me or people like myself often will have a presence on LinkedIn. Any special thoughts on what you would do with LinkedIn, especially if you're just starting out?
Yes and no. So I'm not a LinkedIn expert, much of a LinkedIn expert. I haven't logged into LinkedIn myself in probably a year, but I know that social media platforms like that are important. So whether you are on Facebook, whether you're on LinkedIn, I would pick one and lean into it, unless you feel you can divide your focus like that and do Facebook and LinkedIn. But if LinkedIn makes sense for you in your business plan, if you have a lot of connections already on LinkedIn, then make sure that you are posting on there weekly or regularly. Whatever you might normally put out as a blog post or as an email to your list, copy that onto your, or adapt it a little bit for LinkedIn perhaps, but put that out as well onto your LinkedIn page so that people know you're active, people know you're there and get reminded of you. We talk a lot in the marketing world about funnels and being top of funnel. Posting on something like LinkedIn also gives you the opportunity to stay top of mind, which is probably more important than being top of funnel, being top of mind. So whichever platform you pick, make sure that you're on there and on there regularly so that you stay top of mind with folks.
Yeah, and I can see where some of the things we've already talked about, your hero, those kinds of issues that on your homepage, with some modification, those same ideas could be used to help you put together your LinkedIn profile and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think of the hero section of your website as that attention grabber. We talked about attention, connection, treat. You want to start with that attention grabber on your website too. We just call it your headline. So make sure that you use that section of your website or of a LinkedIn post or of a blog post or social media ad or whatever. You want to start with that attention grabber. So then you can build connection, which might be showing off your expertise, showing off your competence, but you grab attention first. You speak to a problem first, or speak to just something that grabs attention, makes people look your way first. And then, then you can build that connection through the rest of your post.
Yeah. And I think of that, again, when I started with LinkedIn and I was still in the corporate world, we thought of LinkedIn as just a online resume almost. Well, in this case, when you're actually promoting, and people have been adapting to this over time, but now, especially if you're going to start a second career, an encore career, you got to rethink how you're using that LinkedIn profile a little bit, and it makes sense to use the things you've already talked about.
Absolutely. And again, if you're already on LinkedIn like you were, then that's just the natural next step, right? If you're already on Facebook, that's just your natural next step. If you're already on Instagram, that's natural to start using that. Don't make it overly complicated. Whatever you're already using, use it. Typically, just pick one and run with it, because that's where your audience probably already is. Now, Facebook, you might just be connected to your family and friends. Maybe don't use that. But LinkedIn is a much more, we go on there for business purposes. It used to be just resume focused or job hunter focused, but it's so much more than that now. If you're already there, then that's the one that I'd typically recommend. If you're on none, it's the one I'd recommend you start with in terms of business building. But if you've already got a great Facebook and you love Facebook or you love Instagram, or God forbid you love TikTok, then just lean into what you already love and build an audience or grow an audience there.
Any other next steps or additional thoughts you would have for the audience? Or maybe just what are some of the services you would offer to people if they wanted to work with you?
I would be remiss if I didn't recommend that people start growing their email list right away. There are ways you can do that. We talked about having an opt-in on your homepage. So that's a lead magnet that people, or a PDF rather, that people can download. Maybe it's a webinar that they can sign up for. But even still today, email marketing sells better, sells more, is more successful than all social media combined. So if you're not growing an email list, you're missing out. There are free ways to do it. You can start building it right away, just with a free service from MailChimp or ConvertKit or whatever. There are expensive tools out there as well, but start growing an email list today. The saying, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Do that. The best time to start growing your email list was 20 years ago or whenever, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The second best time is now. So make sure that you start growing and building an email list. And that's also, especially if when you start to communicate with them regularly through email, send out a weekly email, a monthly email, and it's focused on them and helping them succeed. That's how that becomes a very valuable and profitable asset for you. Because they look to you, they look forward to your emails. We all have a few people that we're email recipients of, few people that we don't want to see, people that we don't like, and that's usually because they're always pitching something or selling something. But there's probably others where they come across our inbox and we read it because we really want to know what they have to say or teach us, and we really want to connect with them in that way because it's valuable stuff. So become that type of person to your email list, that they look forward to your emails. And that email list will start making you money hand over fist. It really will. The data out there is that for every person, eventually, over time, every person on your email list is worth, I think it's $27 or $37 to you. So if you grow a list of 1,000 people, that list is worth $37,000 to you in your business. If you grow, I'm not there, but if you grow a list of 10,000 people, that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to you in your business. So it's worth starting that today. And then, send them valuable content, good content as well. But again, that gives you another avenue to play with this stuff, to have fun with the stuff that you're sending out. See what gets great open rates. See what people reply to, what they like the most, and then lean into what they tell you they like the most as well. Grow an email list, engage that email list, and then have fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, while a lot of what I do is with a podcast, I've talked about the same subject multiple times over the last 2 years of my podcast and just said, hey, my thinking's a little different on this now. You don't have to do the once and for all, whether it be your newsletter, your email. It's not a once and for all thing. You can just share your current thinking on that, and that's helpful to people.
Absolutely, yeah. And a podcast is one way to do it. If we're verbal processors, that's great. If people enjoy listening to the audio, that's great. Some people like writing out their thoughts instead. So an email that they send out to their list is great. Other people like reading those things rather than listening. So giving them that opportunity to read it rather than hear it is also very powerful. I do both in my business. I know a lot of businesses do both. There's a podcast and there's an email every week that they can either listen or they can read. If you have a podcast or you have a blog or whatever, you have a YouTube channel, which is way too complicated for me. If you have one of those other things, then you've automatically, what your next email is going to be about, because it's going to be about whatever you just talked about on the podcast or on the blog post or whatever. So when you start to grow and you start to layer these things, then it just becomes easier. It takes a bit to get there, but if you're intentional and take the right steps, then you can get there and it doesn't need to take too long.
As you started out literally with a story with someone, and then they just keep building on that and you start exploring different facets of your expertise, it may be. It's one of those things, you're starting with one story, but you can really expand on that in any number of ways.
You're including the parts that you connect with your audience. So if you just speak to that story, you know that audience because you probably came out of that field. You're consulting now the people that used to pay you a paycheck. Now you're consulting for that same audience. Those pain points, what they need, the stories that you can tell. And again, those make for great podcast episodes. Those make for great emails. I mentioned a minute ago, the emails that I still open and read, those are the ones that, at least when I signed up, I knew their story and I was interested because I was connected with their story. So, we mentioned Mike's emails I open because I know his story. I'm interested in his story. It happens to be similar to mine, so I'm interested in that story. But other folks that market in the online space, there are tons of us, but the ones whose emails I actually signed up for and open, those are the ones because they know how to tell that story. They know how to tell it well as well. But they have the ones that I open, they have this gift of combining, I'm thinking of two specifically, they have the data, but they wrap it in a story as well. So they're walking me through their numbers of their last product launch or how they get such great blog open rates or whatever. So they have that data, but they're wrapping it in a story to show me what they did, how they did it, not in a boring way, but in a story-based way that actually I want to open and read. And we can all learn to do the same thing. Again, it's step by step, have fun with it, play around with it, which is not to be dismissive. Just that's how we learn. We have fun with it. We explore it a little bit. Then we know how to become one of these experts and gurus that people actually really want to connect with because we've given ourselves that permission. I think that's important to remember. That permission is important.
Great. Any final thoughts, Geoff? And certainly your contact information will be in the show notes and everything. Any other thoughts about how people can connect with you?
Yeah, I think the simplest way, you mentioned LinkedIn, I mentioned Instagram. If you're already on Instagram, you can add me at Geoff Kullman, send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Next best way is if you want to geek out on this thing we call copywriting. My podcast is called The Psychology of Copywriting. So you can go ahead there, check that out. Even if you don't see yourself as a copywriter, you see yourself as this expert in another field, you don't have to be a copywriter to write great copy. So you can listen in on my podcast and learn some simple lessons. Doesn't have to be elaborate, some simple lessons based on psychology and neuroscience, and geek out on that stuff along with me. So The Psychology of Copywriting podcast.
Okay. And if they want to actually hire you to write copy for them, they fill out your contact form?
Yeah, they can go on my website, click the work with me button or the services page. They go to the same place. And yeah, there's some forms there based on what they're looking for help with, whether it's emails or sales pages or launch campaigns.
Okay. Well, again, thanks so much, Geoff. I appreciate it. My audience appreciates all your insights. I thank you much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Again, our thanks to Geoff for sharing great ideas for people developing Encore careers and to understand the story that they need to tell. Here again are some of the topics we covered in this episode. How can Geoff help someone start their personal brand? What are the elements of the story that they need to tell? What are the pieces of material they need to create first? And how has he worked with people who are beginning their Encore careers? Please refer to the reference to Geoff's website in the show notes. And as always, I encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode as you start exploring the ideas we covered today. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.